Good luck getting home, Mom, they shouted as they drove away, leaving me stranded in the middle of nowhere. I stood there at 70 years old, watching their car disappear into the distance. But what I discovered when I finally made it back changed everything, and the revenge I took left them both destroyed. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I never imagined my own daughter would leave me to die in a forest. At 70, I thought I'd seen every kind of cruelty a person could inflict on their parent. I'd raised Melody alone after my husband passed away from a sudden heart attack when she was just 11 years old. Those had been the hardest years of my life. Working as a night shift nurse at Riverside General Hospital while taking on weekend cleaning jobs just to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. I remember falling asleep standing up more times than I could count, my body screaming for rest that never seemed to come. But I did it all gladly. Melody was my world, my reason for pushing through the exhaustion and pain. When she got accepted to Westfield University with a partial scholarship, I took out loans I'm still paying off to cover the rest. When she wanted to study abroad in her junior year, I picked up extra shifts and sold my mother's antique jewelry collection to make it happen. When she married Vincent 3 years ago, I emptied my savings account to help pay for the wedding she'd always dreamed of. I never asked for gratitude. I never kept a tally of what I'd sacrificed. That's what mothers do. We give everything we have because we love our children more than we love ourselves. But standing on that deserted forest trail in the middle of Pine Haven Wilderness, 3 hours from the nearest town, watching my daughter's silver Mercedes SUV speed away in a cloud of dust and scattered gravel, I realized that love doesn't always flow both ways. Sometimes the child you die for would rather watch you die instead. The morning had started so innocently. It was a Tuesday when Melody called me, her voice bright and cheerful in that particular way that should have set off alarm bells in my head. But I was so desperate for connection with my daughter that I ignored every instinct screaming at me to be careful. "Mom," she'd practically sung into the phone, "I have the most amazing idea. Vincent and I want to take you on an adventure this weekend." My heart had actually skipped a beat. It had been 4 months since Melody had initiated contact with me. 4 long months of my calls going to voicemail, my text messages receiving one-word responses if I was lucky, and my invitations to lunch or coffee being met with excuses about busy schedules and important commitments. "An adventure?" I'd asked, trying to keep the desperate hope out of my voice. "Yes, remember how you used to talk about wanting to see the Pine Haven forest trails? How you always said you'd love to go hiking in real wilderness before you got too old?" I did remember saying that, though it had been years ago, back when Melody still talked to me about things beyond surface-level pleasantries, back when we were still close. "I remember," I said softly. "Well, Vincent found this incredible trail. It's completely off the beaten path, no tourists, no crowds, just pristine nature. We thought it would be perfect for a family bonding day, just the 3 of us, spending quality time together." The words family bonding and quality time were like water to someone dying of thirst. I should have questioned why this sudden interest in spending time with me. I should have wondered what had changed. But I was so starved for my daughter's attention that I grabbed onto this opportunity with both hands. "That sounds absolutely wonderful, sweetheart," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "When were you thinking?" "This Saturday, we'll pick you up at 6 a.m. sharp. Make sure you dress comfortably and bring your best walking shoes. Oh, and Mom, don't bring too much stuff. We want to keep things simple and natural, just yourself and maybe a water bottle." "Of course, honey. I'll be ready. Thank you so much for thinking of me." "We love you, Mom," Melody said, and those 3 words carried me through the rest of the week like I was floating on air. Saturday morning arrived with clear blue skies and the kind of warm sunshine that promised a perfect day. I was awake by 4:30 a.m., too excited to sleep. I made myself a simple breakfast of toast and coffee, but I was too nervous to eat more than a few bites. This was my chance to reconnect with Melody, to rebuild the relationship that had been crumbling for the past year. I dressed carefully in my comfortable khaki hiking pants and a lightweight blue jacket. The walking shoes I wore were relatively new. I'd bought them 6 months ago at a clearance sale, thinking I might start taking morning walks to help with my arthritis. I'd only worn them twice, but they seemed sturdy enough for a forest trail. Despite Melody's instruction to travel light, I packed a small canvas backpack with 3 bottles of water, some granola bars, a basic first aid kit, and my medications. At 70, I'd learned never to go anywhere without my blood pressure pills and the medication for my heart condition. I also slipped my phone into my jacket pocket, though the battery was only at 40% because I had forgotten to charge it overnight. By 5:45 a.m., I was standing at my apartment window, watching the street below for any sign of their vehicle. My small one-bedroom apartment in the Riverside district wasn't much, but it was home. I'd lived here for 8 years, ever since I'd sold the house where I'd raised Melody. The house was too big, too full of memories, and too expensive to maintain on my fixed retirement income. At exactly 6 a.m., I saw the silver Mercedes SUV pull up to the curb. My heart leaped with joy, and I grabbed my backpack, hurrying down the 3 flights of stairs as fast as my aging knees would allow. "Morning, Mom," Melody called through the open window as I emerged from the building. Her smile was dazzling, showing perfect white teeth that had cost me $3,000 in orthodontic work when she was a teenager. She looked beautiful in expensive athleisure wear, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail, designer sunglasses perched on her head. Vincent sat in the driver's seat, his hands gripping the steering wheel. He gave me the briefest nod of acknowledgement, his jaw tight. Vincent had never been particularly warm toward me, but over the past year, his coldness had evolved into something closer to hostility. I'd tried to talk to Melody about it once, but she'd brushed off my concerns, saying I was being too sensitive. "Good morning, sweetheart," I said, opening the back door and climbing in. "Good morning, Vincent. Thank you both so much for including me today." "Wouldn't be the same without you," Melody said, though something about her tone felt off. Too bright, too rehearsed, like an actress delivering a line she'd practiced. The Mercedes pulled away from the curb smoothly, and I settled back into the leather seat, breathing in the new car smell mixed with Melody's expensive perfume. The vehicle was beautiful, with a touchscreen dashboard and seats that felt like butter. I remember wondering, not for the first time, how they could afford such luxury when Melody had been calling me for money just 6 months ago, claiming they were struggling with Vincent's business loan payments. "This is such a nice car," I commented. "When did you get it?" 3 months ago, Vincent said shortly. "Business has been good." Vincent owned a commercial real estate consulting firm called Whitmore Property Solutions. From what little Melody told me, he helped wealthy clients identify investment properties. I'd never fully understood what he did, but apparently it was lucrative enough to afford a vehicle that probably cost more than I made in 2 years of nursing. We drove north out of the city, leaving behind the familiar streets of Riverside and heading into increasingly rural territory. Melody chatted about surface-level topics, a new restaurant they'd tried, a vacation they were planning to Santorini, a furniture piece they'd purchased for their home in the upscale Meadowbrook neighborhood. I tried to engage, asking questions and showing interest, but every attempt at deeper conversation was met with vague responses or subject changes. Vincent remained almost completely silent, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, his jaw muscles clenching and unclenching in a rhythm that made me uneasy. After about an hour, the suburbs gave way to open farmland, then to rolling hills covered in dense forest. The roads grew narrower, the houses more sparse, until we were surrounded by nothing but towering pine trees and empty 2-lane highway. "Where exactly are we going?" I asked, watching unfamiliar landscape roll past my window. "I don't remember the Pine Haven trails being this far out." "It's not the main Pine Haven area," Melody explained without turning around. "Vincent knows about this secret spot. It's on the edge of the Pine Haven wilderness, but it's privately owned land that his family has access to. Completely untouched, Mom. No tourists, no trail markers, no gift shops. Just pure, raw nature." Something about the way she said "no trail markers" made my stomach tighten with unease. But I pushed the feeling down. This was my daughter. She loved me. She wouldn't hurt me. The very thought was absurd. We drove for another hour, then turned off the main highway onto a poorly maintained county road.
The Mercedes bounced over potholes and cracks in the asphalt, and I found myself gripping the door handle to steady myself. The trees grew thicker here, their branches creating a canopy that blocked out much of the morning sunlight. "This road isn't very well maintained," I observed nervously. "That's the point," Vincent said, his first real words in over an hour. "Keeps the crowds away." Eventually, even the county road ended, and Vincent turned onto what could barely be called a dirt road. It was more like two tire tracks cutting through the undergrowth, barely wide enough for the SUV. Branches scraped against the sides of the vehicle, and I winced at the thought of damage to such an expensive car. "Are you sure this is safe? What if we get stuck?" "Vincent knows what he's doing," Melody said, her voice taking on an edge that silenced any further questions. We bounced along this trail for another 20 minutes that felt like an hour. My back was aching from the rough ride, and I was starting to feel genuinely anxious about how far we were from civilization. I pulled out my phone to check if I had any signal. No service. Not even one bar. "There's no signal out here," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Obviously, we're in the middle of nowhere." Finally, he pulled into a small clearing and killed the engine. The sudden silence was almost oppressive. No traffic sounds, no voices, no signs of human presence at all. Just the whisper of wind through the trees and the distant call of a bird I couldn't identify. "Here we are," Vincent announced, climbing out of the driver's seat. I looked around at the dense forest surrounding us on all sides. There were no trail markers, no parking area, no information board, no sign that anyone else had ever been here. Just an overwhelming sense of isolation that made my skin prickle with instinctive fear. "This doesn't look like a hiking trail," I said carefully, as I got out of the car, my legs stiff from the long drive.
"That's because it's exclusive," Melody replied, already walking toward the tree line. "Come on, Mom, let's walk a bit. We need to go a little deeper to get to the really beautiful part." I hesitated, looking back at the Mercedes sitting alone in that clearing. Something felt wrong. Every instinct I'd honed over 70 years of life was screaming at me to get back in that car and demand they take me home. But this was my daughter, my baby girl, and I was so desperate for connection with her that I ignored every warning sign and followed her into the forest. We walked single file along what might have been an animal trail, though it was barely visible beneath the undergrowth. Vincent led the way, his expensive hiking boots crushing leaves and small branches. Melanie walked behind him, and I brought up the rear, my older body struggling to keep pace. My new walking shoes were already getting covered in dirt and mud. Branches caught at my jacket and scratched at my arms. The forest floor was uneven, full of hidden roots and rocks that threatened to trip me with every step. "How much farther?" I called out after about 15 minutes, my breathing becoming labored. "Almost there," Melanie called back without looking at me. But we kept walking. 15 minutes became 20, then 25. My legs were aching, my back was screaming, and I was starting to feel genuinely frightened about how far we were from the car, from the road, from anything resembling civilization. "Melanie, I need to rest," I finally said, my voice shaking. "I can't walk this far. You know I have arthritis. I can barely walk on flat ground, let alone hike 15 miles through wilderness." "You're always telling everyone how strong and independent you are, how you raised Melanie all by yourself, how you worked 2 jobs, how you never needed anyone's help. Well, here's your chance to prove it, Barbara. Show us all how tough you really are." "Melanie," I reached for my daughter's arm, but she stepped back as if my touch might contaminate her. "Please don't do this. I'm your mother. I raised you. I sacrificed everything for you. I love you." For just a fraction of a second, I saw something flicker across her face. Doubt, maybe? Or perhaps the ghost of the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who used to tell me I was her best friend, who used to make me Mother's Day cards with crayons and construction paper. But then Vincent put his hand on her shoulder, his fingers gripping possessively, and whatever I'd seen disappeared like smoke. You've had your turn at life, Barbara. You're old. You're done. Now it's time for us to have our lives, without you draining us dry financially and emotionally. I gave you everything, I whispered, tears now streaming freely down my face. Everything I had, everything I was. How can you do this to me? Easily, Vincent answered for her. Now, we're going back to the car. You're going to stay here. If you try to follow us, if you take even one step in our direction, I promise you, you'll regret it. There was genuine threat in his voice and something in his eyes that made me believe he would hurt me if I didn't comply. They turned and started walking back the way we'd come, back toward the car, back towards civilization and safety and survival. I took one instinctive step forward to follow them, and Vincent spun around, his face twisted with rage. I said, "Stay back," he shouted, and the violence in his voice froze me in place. I stopped, my legs suddenly unable to carry me forward, even though my mind was screaming at me to run, to fight, to do something other than just stand there. "Good luck getting home, Mom," Melody called over her shoulder, her voice carrying that same false brightness from the morning. "I'm sure you'll figure it out. You always do." And then they were gone, disappearing through the trees, their footsteps fading away until there was nothing but silence. I stood, frozen in that spot, listening to the sound of their retreat growing fainter and fainter. I heard their voices in the distance, though I couldn't make out words. I heard laughter. Actual laughter, as if abandoning an elderly woman in the wilderness was the funniest thing in the world. Then I heard the SUV engine start, that expensive purr of German engineering. I heard the crunch of tires on dirt and fallen leaves. I heard the sound growing more distant, then fading away completely. And then there was nothing but silence. Complete, absolute, terrifying silence. I was alone in a forest I didn't know, with no clear path out, no cell phone signal, and no idea which direction to walk. The sun was already well past its peak, which meant I had maybe 5 or 6 hours of daylight left before darkness fell. My daughter had just left me to die. The realization hit me like a physical blow, and my legs gave out completely. I collapsed onto a fallen log, my body shaking with sobs I couldn't control. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. Not to me. Not by my own child. But it was happening. It was real. And I was utterly, completely alone. I don't know how long I sat there crying. Long enough that my tears dried on my cheeks. Long enough that the initial shock began to fade, replaced by something else, something harder. Fear. Yes, there was fear. I'd be a fool not to be afraid. But underneath the fear, something else was growing. Something cold and determined. Anger. If Melody and Vincent thought I was just going to lie down and die out here, they were wrong. I'd survived an abusive childhood, an unexpected widowhood, single motherhood, and 70 years of life throwing everything it had at me. I wasn't going to let them win. I wiped my face with my sleeve and stood up on shaking legs. I pulled out my phone. Still no signal, battery now at 38%, and looked at the time, 11:47 a.m. I'd been sitting here longer than I thought. I opened my backpack and took inventory. 3 bottles of water, 5 granola bars, a small first aid kit, my medications, not much, but it was something. I looked up at the sun, trying to remember what Melody had said. 15 miles due east. Follow the sun. Find the road.
15 miles. I'd never walked 15 miles in my life, not even when I was young. With my arthritis, my heart condition, my age, it seemed impossible. But what choice did I have? I picked a direction that seemed to align with where the sun was heading and started walking. And as I walked, stumbling over roots and pushing through undergrowth, I made myself a promise. If I survived this, when I survived this, Melody and Vincent would pay for what they'd done. I just had no idea yet how much they'd actually given me to work with. The first hour of walking was the hardest. Not because of the physical exhaustion, though that was certainly real. Not because of the fear, though that gnawed at me with every step. The hardest part was accepting that what had happened was real. That my daughter, the child I had carried in my body for 9 months, had actually abandoned me in the wilderness to die. My mind kept trying to find alternative explanations. Maybe this was some kind of intervention. Maybe they were testing me somehow. Maybe they'd parked just around the bend and were waiting to see if I'd panic or stay calm. But deep down, I knew the truth. The cruelty in Vincent's eyes, the coldness in Melody's voice, the way they had laughed as they walked away, these weren't the actions of people planning to come back. They wanted me gone, permanently. I stumbled over another root, catching myself against a tree trunk before I fell. My hands were already scratched and bleeding from pushing through thorny bushes. My new walking shoes were covered in mud and already giving me blisters on both heels. Every breath burned in my chest, and my heart was beating irregularly, that frightening flutter that my cardiologist had warned me about. I stopped to rest against the tree, pulling out one of my water bottles and taking a small sip. I had to ration carefully. 3 bottles might seem like enough, but in this heat, walking this much, I could easily become dehydrated. The forest around me was beautiful in a terrifying way. Towering pine trees stretched toward the sky, their branches filtering the sunlight into dancing patterns on the forest floor. I could hear birds calling to each other, the rustle of small animals in the undergrowth, the whisper of wind through the leaves. Under different circumstances, I might have found it peaceful. Now it just felt like a green prison with no walls and no exit. I checked my phone again. Still no signal, battery now at 35%. I turned it off to conserve power, even though the rational part of my brain knew it probably wouldn't matter. If I didn't find my way out before dark, a phone with a dead battery would be the least of my problems. I kept walking, trying to keep the sun on my right side as it moved across the sky. East, Melody had said. 15 miles east. The words kept repeating in my head like a cruel mantra.
My legs were trembling with exhaustion. My back screamed with every step. The arthritis in my knees felt like shards of glass grinding against bone. But I kept moving because stopping meant dying, and I refused to give Melody and Vincent that satisfaction. By what I guessed was around 3 p.m., I'd finished my first water bottle and 2 granola bars. I had no idea how far I'd walked. Maybe 3 miles? Maybe only 1? The forest all looked the same, and I had no way of knowing if I was even walking in a straight line or wandering in circles. That's when I heard the sound of running water. At first, I thought I was hallucinating, my dehydrated brain conjuring up what I desperately needed. But no, there it was again. The distinct gurgle and splash of a stream or creek somewhere nearby. I changed direction, following the sound through increasingly dense undergrowth. Branches tore at my clothes and face. My jacket caught on a thorn bush and I heard fabric rip, but I didn't care. Water meant life. Water meant I could refill my bottles. Water meant maybe, just maybe, I had a chance. I pushed through a final barrier of bushes and nearly fell down a small embankment. Below me, maybe 6 feet down, was a creek. Not a large one, maybe 10 feet wide, but the water was moving, which meant it was probably safe to drink if I was careful. Getting down the embankment was treacherous. I had to half slide, half climb, grabbing at roots and rocks to slow my descent.
My hands were torn up even worse by the time I reached the bottom, but I'd made it. The water was cold and clear, flowing over smooth stones. I knelt at the edge, every joint in my body protesting, and cupped my hands to drink. The first mouthful was heaven, cold, clean, with just a hint of mineral taste. I drank until my stomach felt uncomfortably full, then refilled all 3 of my water bottles. As I was capping the last bottle, something caught my eye downstream. A piece of fabric caught on a branch extending over the water. My heart started racing for a different reason now. Fabric meant people, or at least it meant people had been here. I worked my way along the creek bank, my feet slipping on wet stones, until I could reach the branch. I grabbed the fabric and pulled it free. It was a scarf. An expensive silk scarf in a distinctive peacock blue color with a designer pattern. I'd seen this scarf before, recently. My hands started shaking as I stared at it, my brain struggling to make the connection. Where had I seen this? When? And then it hit me like a freight train. 6 months ago, when Melody had called me crying, saying she and Vincent were in terrible financial trouble, when she'd begged me to take out a loan against my tiny retirement account to help them avoid foreclosure on their house, when I'd done it without question because she was my daughter and she needed me. She'd been wearing this scarf that day when she came to pick up the check. I remembered commenting on how beautiful it was, and she had said it was a gift from Vincent, bought before they knew how bad their financial situation was. What was it doing here, in this creek, in this forest where they'd claimed to know a secret family trail? I looked around more carefully, my nurse's training kicking in despite my exhaustion. If the scarf was here, what else might be? I spent the next 20 minutes searching the immediate area around the creek, and what I found made my blood run cold. More fabric scraps caught in branches, a broken bracelet half buried in mud, expensive looking with what might have been real diamonds, a torn piece of paper, too water damaged to read, but with what looked like part of a woman's name, Patricia Thorntoe? And then, wedged between 2 rocks at the edge of the water, I found something that made my hands shake so badly I almost dropped it. A driver's license. Water damaged, but still partially readable. The photo showed a woman, maybe in her 60s, with kind eyes and gray hair. The name was mostly legible, Patricia Thornton. Address in Riverside, my own neighborhood. Date of birth showed she would have been 68. Would have been. Past tense, because something about finding her license here in this remote location, along with torn fabric and broken jewelry, suggested that Patricia Thornton hadn't left this forest the same way she'd entered it. My mind was racing. This couldn't be a coincidence. Melody and Vincent bringing me to this specific location, the secret family trail that Vincent supposedly knew about, the cruel efficiency of their abandonment as if they had done this before and knew exactly how it would play out. Had they done this before to Patricia Thornton? To others? I sank down onto a rock, my legs suddenly unable to hold me. I felt sick. Not just physically sick from exhaustion and dehydration, but soul-sick from the horror of what I was beginning to understand. My daughter wasn't just cruel. She was potentially a murderer. And I was supposed to be next. The realization didn't paralyze me with fear, the way you might expect. Instead, it filled me with a cold, burning rage that gave me strength I didn't know I still had.
I carefully collected everything I'd found, the scarf, the bracelet pieces, the torn paper, and especially Patricia Thornton's driver's license. I wrapped them in the scarf and stuffed the bundle into my backpack. Evidence. I was collecting evidence. Because I wasn't going to die in this forest. I was going to survive, and when I did, Melody and Vincent were going to pay for every single person they'd hurt. I stood up, my body screaming in protest, and started following the creek downstream. Water always flows downward, toward civilization. It was basic survival knowledge, and right now, basic survival knowledge was all I had. The next several hours blurred together into an endless cycle of walking, resting, walking again. The creek bank wasn't easy terrain, wet, rocky, uneven, but at least I wasn't lost. As long as I followed the water, I was moving in some kind of purposeful direction. My blisters had blisters. My feet felt like they were on fire. Every step sent jolts of pain up my legs and into my spine. The irregular heart flutter had become more frequent, making me stop every 20 minutes or so to let it settle back into normal rhythm. I'd taken my blood pressure medication and heart pills dry, swallowing them with creek water. I didn't know if the water was truly safe to drink, but dehydration would kill me faster than any bacteria. The sun was getting lower in the sky now, probably around 6 or 7 p.m. The shadows were growing longer, the temperature dropping. I'd been walking for 7 or 8 hours, and I had no idea how much distance I'd actually covered. Fear was starting to creep back in. What if the creek didn't lead to civilization? What if it just went deeper into the wilderness? What if I'd been walking in the wrong direction this entire time? That's when I heard it. Faint at first. So faint I thought I was imagining it. The sound of a car engine. I stopped dead in my tracks, holding my breath, straining to hear. There it was again, and again. Multiple vehicles, actually. The distinctive sound of traffic. A road. There was a road nearby. I wanted to run toward the sound, but my body wouldn't cooperate. The best I could manage was a shuffling, fast walk, stumbling over rocks and roots, driven by desperate hope. The creek bank was widening now, the banks becoming less steep, and then suddenly, I saw it through the trees ahead, a concrete culvert where the creek passed under a road. A road! An actual paved road with painted lines and everything. I could have cried with relief, but I was too dehydrated for tears. I scrambled up the embankment on the far side of the culvert, using weeds and grass to pull myself up. My hands were bleeding again, my knees scraped raw, but I didn't care. I hauled myself up onto the shoulder of the road and just lay there for a moment, gasping, my heart hammering wildly in my chest. A truck roared past so close I felt the wind from it, then the blast of an air horn as the driver registered my presence. I forced myself to sit up, then to stand. I was standing on the shoulder of what looked like a state highway. 2 lanes in each direction, moderate traffic. In the distance, maybe half a mile up the road, I could see lights. A gas station, just like Melody had said. Part of me marveled at the fact that she'd been telling the truth about that detail. There really was a gas station, which meant they'd planned this carefully. They'd researched. They knew exactly where they were leaving me and how far I'd have to walk to reach help. They knew, and they did it anyway. I started walking along the shoulder toward those lights, my body moving on autopilot. Cars and trucks whizzed past, but none stopped. I probably looked like a crazy homeless woman, dirty, bloody, stumbling along in torn clothes with a backpack. It took me another 20 minutes to reach the gas station. By the time I stumbled into the parking lot, I was operating on nothing but willpower and fury. The station was one of those big truck stops, pumps for regular vehicles, diesel pumps for semis, a convenience store, and what looked like a small restaurant attached. The sign said, Pine Haven Junction Travel Plaza. I pushed through the door of the convenience store, and the blast of air conditioning hit me like a physical force. The teenage clerk behind the counter looked up from his phone, and his eyes went wide. "Ma'am, are you okay? Do you need me to call someone?" I must have looked worse than I thought. I caught sight of my reflection in the security mirror behind the counter, face scratched and bleeding, hair wild with leaves and twigs in it, clothes torn and filthy, eyes haunted.
"I need to call the police," I said, my voice coming out as a croak. "And I need water, please." The clerk was already reaching for the phone, but he also grabbed a bottle of water from the cooler and thrust it toward me. "Here, take this. It's on the house. What happened to you? Were you in an accident?" I twisted the cap off the water bottle and drank half of it in one long swallow before answering. I was abandoned in the Pine Haven forest by my daughter and her husband. They left me there to die. The clerk's face went pale. "They what?" "Call the police," I repeated, my voice stronger now. "And tell them I have evidence of murder." The word hung in the air between us. The clerk stared at me for a long moment, then rapidly dialed 911. While he talked to the emergency dispatcher, I sank down onto the floor right there in the convenience store, my back against a display of motor oil. I couldn't stand anymore. My body had taken me as far as it could go. Other customers were staring at me, but I didn't care. I clutched my backpack to my chest, feeling the weight of the evidence inside. Patricia Thornton's driver's license, the pieces I'd found, the proof that this wasn't the first time Melody and Vincent had done this.
"Police are on their way," the clerk said, kneeling down beside me. "And an ambulance. You look like you need medical attention." "I'm a retired nurse," I told him. "I know exactly what I need. What I need is for those monsters to pay for what they've done." "Your daughter really left you in the forest?" a woman asked. She'd been buying lottery tickets but had stopped to stare at me. "She did," I confirmed. "And unless I'm very wrong, I'm not the first elderly woman she and her husband have abandoned there." A murmur ran through the growing crowd of customers. The clerk looked horrified. That's insane. Why would anyone do that?" "Money," I said flatly. "It's always about money." The police arrived within 10 minutes, 2 sheriff's deputies in a brown and tan cruiser. They came into the store with hands on their weapons, clearly not sure what they were responding to. "I'm the one who called," the clerk said quickly. "This lady says she was abandoned in the forest." The older deputy, a man in his 40s with graying hair and a weathered face, knelt down beside me. His name tag read Deputy Morris. "Ma'am, I'm Deputy Morris. Can you tell me what happened?" I took a deep breath and told him everything. The fake hiking trip, the drive into the wilderness, the abandonment, the things I'd found by the creek, and my suspicions about what it all meant. By the time I finished, both deputies were staring at me with expressions of horror and disbelief. "You think your daughter is killing elderly people?" Deputy Morris asked carefully. "I think she and her husband are targeting vulnerable elderly people, gaining their trust, getting access to their finances, and then disposing of them in that forest. And I have evidence." I opened my backpack and carefully pulled out the bundle wrapped in the peacock blue scarf. I laid it out on the convenience store floor, laying out Patricia Thornton's driver's license, the jewelry fragments, the torn paper. "I found all of this in the creek," I said. "This driver's license belongs to a woman named Patricia Thornton. She lived in my neighborhood in Riverside. I want you to check if she's been reported missing." The younger deputy was already on his radio, calling in the name. Deputy Morris picked up the driver's license with a pen, careful not to touch it directly. "This is definitely evidence of something," he said slowly. "But ma'am, I have to ask, are you sure about the accusations you're making? This is your daughter we're talking about." "I'm 70 years old," I said, meeting his eyes directly. "I've been a nurse for 45 years. I know the difference between paranoid delusion and reasonable suspicion based on evidence. My daughter and her husband left me to die in that forest. And unless I'm very wrong, Patricia Thornton died there too." The younger deputy's radio crackled. He listened, then looked at his partner with wide eyes. "Patricia Thornton was reported missing 4 months ago. Last seen leaving her home in Riverside with her niece and the niece's husband. Said they were going on a day trip, never came home. The case is still open." The convenience store went absolutely silent. Everyone was staring at me now. Deputy Morris's expression had changed from skeptical to serious. "Ma'am, I need you to tell me your daughter's name." "Melody Christine Whitmore," I said clearly. "Her husband is Vincent James Whitmore. They live at 4782 Brookstone Lane in the Meadowbrook district of Riverside. They drive a silver Mercedes SUV, probably less than 6 months old." The deputy was writing everything down. "And your name?" "Barbara Ann Whitmore. I live at the Riverside Gardens Apartments, Unit 3B. "The ambulance is here," the clerk called from the doorway. I shook my head. "I don't need an ambulance. I need to file a formal complaint and provide my evidence. I need you to investigate Patricia Thornton's case and see if there's a connection to my daughter. And I need protection because when Melody realizes I survived, she's going to know I'm a threat." Deputy Morris studied me for a long moment. "Ma'am, you need medical attention. You're injured and clearly exhausted, but I believe you. We're going to investigate this fully. But first, let's get you checked out and get your statement properly recorded." I allowed the paramedics to examine me, though I refused to go to the hospital. Minor cuts and scratches, severe blisters, dehydration, exhaustion, but nothing life-threatening. They cleaned and bandaged my wounds, gave me electrolyte drinks, and took my vital signs. My blood pressure was through the roof, and my heart rhythm was concerning, but I was alive. Against all odds, despite my daughter's best efforts, I was alive. And now, I was angry. The deputies drove me to the county sheriff's station, a small building about 15 miles from the travel plaza. They set me up in an interview room with water, coffee, and sandwiches from a local deli, and I gave them the most detailed statement I'd ever provided in my life. I told them everything about my relationship with Melody, about the money I'd given her over the years, about the sudden improvement in their financial situation that never made sense. I told them about today's events in minute detail, and I told them about what I'd found by the creek. They photographed all of the evidence I had collected. They took my torn and dirty clothes as evidence. They documented every scratch and bruise on my body.
"We're going to need to get a search warrant for your daughter's home and vehicle," Deputy Morris said. "And we're going to need to talk to Patricia Thornton's family, see if they can identify any of these items you found. But, ma'am, I have to warn you, this is going to take time. We can't just arrest someone based on suspicions." "I understand," I said. "But you need to move fast, because once they realize I'm not dead, they're going to run." Deputy Morris nodded grimly. "We'll put surveillance on their house tonight. And, ma'am, where are you planning to stay? I don't think it's safe for you to go back to your apartment." I hadn't thought about that. Going home meant Melody would know where to find me, and if she and Vincent really were killers, I couldn't put myself in their path again. "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't have much money for a hotel, and I don't have any family besides Melody." "We can put you in protective custody for tonight," he said. "It's not comfortable, but it's safe, and tomorrow we'll figure out something better." I spent that night in a small room at the sheriff's station, lying on a cot that was somehow both too soft and too hard, staring at the ceiling and processing everything that had happened. 24 hours ago, I'd been excited about spending time with my daughter. I'd been hopeful about rebuilding our relationship. Now I knew my daughter was a monster who had tried to kill me, and possibly had killed before. I should have been devastated. I should have been crying, mourning the loss of the child I'd loved. But instead, I felt something else. Something cold and hard and unbreakable. I felt determined. Melody and Vincent had made a critical mistake. They underestimated me. They assumed that leaving an old woman in the forest was the same as killing her. They assumed I would give up, lie down, and die quietly. They were about to learn just how wrong they'd been, because I wasn't just going to survive this. I was going to make sure they paid for every crime they'd committed, for Patricia Thornton, for any other victims I didn't know about yet, and for trying to murder their own mother. They wanted me gone? They wanted me dead? Well, they were about to discover that the woman they'd left in that forest was coming back. And she was coming back for justice. I woke up on that uncomfortable cot at 6 a.m., my entire body one massive bruise. Every muscle screamed in protest as I tried to sit up. My feet were so swollen I couldn't get my shoes back on, and the blisters had opened during the night, leaving bloody spots on the thin blanket they had given me. But I was alive, and that was more than Melody and Vincent had planned for me. Deputy Morris knocked on the door at 6:30, carrying a paper bag from a local bakery and 2 cups of coffee. His face was drawn with exhaustion, and I realized he probably hadn't slept much either. "Morning, Mrs. Whitmore," he said, setting the breakfast down on the small table. "How are you feeling?" "Like I was abandoned in a forest and walked 15 miles, I said dryly. "But alive." He smiled grimly. "Good, because we've got developments you need to know about." I straightened up as much as my aching body would allow, accepting the coffee gratefully. The warmth in my hands felt like a small piece of normalcy in a world that had gone completely insane. "We ran surveillance on your daughter's house last night," Deputy Morris began, pulling out a notebook. "At 11:47 p.m., we observed Melody and Vincent Whitmore loading suitcases into their vehicle. Large suitcases, Mrs. Whitmore. The kind you pack for an extended trip." My blood ran cold. They're running. That was our assessment, too. We pulled them over 3 miles from their house, cited a broken taillight as cause. They were cooperative, seemed nervous but not panicked. We couldn't search the vehicle without probable cause, but we could observe what was in plain sight. And, I leaned forward, ignoring the pain the movement caused, we observed 6 large suitcases, multiple boxes, and what appeared to be file folders and a laptop in the backseat. When we asked where they were going at midnight, Vincent claimed they had an early morning flight for a business trip to Seattle. When we asked which airport, he hesitated before saying SeaTac, which doesn't make sense given they were driving away from the regional airport. "They were lying," I said flatly. "Obviously. But we couldn't hold them on a lie about travel plans. We issued a warning about the taillight and let them go. However, we did put a tracking alert on their license plate. If they try to cross state lines, we'll be notified." I sipped my coffee, my mind racing. They know something's wrong. Maybe not that I survived, but something spooked them. That's our theory, too. Now, here's where it gets interesting. We contacted Patricia Thornton's family last night. Her sister, Margaret Thornton Chen, lives in Riverside. She came in at midnight to view the items you found. He pulled out his phone and showed me photos. The peacock blue scarf, the broken bracelet, the torn paper, all laid out on an evidence table. Margaret identified the scarf immediately. It was Patricia's favorite, a gift from her late husband. The bracelet was also confirmed as belonging to Patricia. It was her mother's, a family heirloom. Margaret broke down when she saw them. I felt a wave of sadness wash over me. So Patricia Thornton is definitely dead. We don't have a body yet, but given the circumstances and the evidence, we're treating this as a homicide investigation. Margaret also provided us with some information that's going to be very useful to your case.
He pulled out a folder and opened it, showing me several documents. Patricia Thornton was a widow with no children. Her estate was worth approximately $380,000. Not wealthy by some standards, but comfortable. She had a retirement account, savings, and owned her home outright. 4 months before she disappeared, she added someone to her bank accounts as a joint holder. I already knew what he was going to say before the words left his mouth. "Melody Whitmore," Deputy Morris confirmed. "Your daughter convinced Patricia to make her a joint account holder, claiming it would make it easier to help Patricia manage her finances as she got older. Patricia's sister, Margaret, had warned her against it, said it seemed suspicious, but Patricia insisted that Melody was like the daughter she never had." The words hit me like a physical blow.
Patricia had trusted Melody, had seen her as a daughter, and Melody had killed her for it. Within 2 weeks of being added to the accounts, Deputy Morris continued, large withdrawals started. 5,000 here, 8,000 there, always just under the amount that would trigger automatic bank reviews. Over the course of 3 months, approximately $127,000 was withdrawn from Patricia's accounts. And then Patricia disappeared, I said quietly. Exactly. On a Saturday morning, Melody and Vincent picked her up, claiming they were taking her to see the Pine Haven forest trails. Sound familiar? It's the exact same method they used on me. The same lies, the same location, probably the same trail. We think so too. And, Mrs. Whitmore, there's more. We ran a background check on your daughter and son-in-law, going back through financial records, social connections, everything we could access without a warrant. We found 3 other elderly women who had similar patterns of interaction with Melody over the past 2 years. 3 others. My stomach turned to ice. Deputy Morris laid out 3 more files on the table between us. Dorothy Brennan, age 73, disappeared 18 months ago. Last seen with her dear friend Melody, who had been helping her with her finances. Estate worth $290,000. Melody was listed as a beneficiary in a hastily changed will that Dorothy's family is still contesting. He opened the second file. Linda Marie Kowalski, age 67, disappeared 13 months ago. She'd been isolated from her family by a younger woman she'd befriended, a woman matching Melody's description, though she used the name Melissa White in that case. Linda's savings account was drained of $85,000 before her disappearance. Her body was found 6 months later by hikers in the Pine Haven wilderness. Cause of death was listed as exposure and dehydration. I felt tears burning in my eyes, but I forced them back. I needed to hear this. I needed to know the full scope of what my daughter had done. The third file was thinner. Rosemary Chen, age 75, disappeared 8 months ago. Also last seen with a younger woman she'd been helping by giving financial advice. Rosemary's family reported that she'd withdrawn $45,000 from her retirement account in the weeks before her disappearance, claiming she was investing in a business opportunity. Rosemary hasn't been found yet. Deputy Morris closed the files and looked at me with something like pity in his eyes. Mrs. Whitmore, we believe your daughter and son-in-law are serial killers who target vulnerable elderly women. They befriend their victims, gain access to their finances, steal as much as they can, and then dispose of them in the wilderness. You were supposed to be their next victim. I sat there in that small room, staring at the files spread across the table, trying to reconcile the smiling little girl in my memories with the monster these documents described. 4 women, possibly 5 if you counted me, all elderly, all vulnerable, all betrayed by someone they trusted. The money, I said suddenly. The SUV, the expensive clothes, the house in Meadowbrook, it all came from murdered women. That's what we believe. The financial forensics team is going through everything now, but the preliminary analysis shows that every major purchase your daughter and son-in-law have made in the past 2 years can be traced back to cash deposits that coincide with these disappearances. Why? The word came out as a broken whisper. Why would she do this? I raised her better than this. I taught her to be kind, to be compassionate, to help people who needed it. Deputy Morris's expression softened. Mrs. Whitmore, you're not responsible for your daughter's choices. Adults make their own decisions, and sometimes those decisions are evil. That's not a reflection on you as a mother. But it felt like it was. It felt like I failed at the most fundamental job a parent has, raising a decent human being. A knock on the door interrupted us. A female deputy I hadn't met before poked her head in. Morris, the Torton Chen family is here. They're asking to speak with Mrs. Whitmore. Deputy Morris looked at me. Are you up for that? They're understandably emotional, but they wanted to meet the woman who found evidence of what happened to Patricia. I nodded. Straightening my borrowed clothes, the sheriff's station had provided me with a clean sweatshirt and pants, since my own were still being held as evidence. Margaret Torton Chen entered the room a moment later, and I immediately understood where Patricia had gotten her kind eyes.
Margaret was probably in her mid-60s, with silver-streaked hair and a face marked by recent grief. Behind her came a younger woman, maybe 40, who Margaret introduced as her daughter, Jennifer.
Mrs. Whitmore, Margaret said, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know how to thank you. We've been searching for answers about Patricia for 4 months. The police investigation had gone cold. And then you found her scarf, her bracelet. She broke down, and Jennifer put an arm around her mother's shoulders. I'm so sorry, I said, my own voice breaking. I'm sorry about Patricia, and I'm sorry that my daughter is the reason she's gone. Margaret looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. This isn't your fault. You didn't know what she was doing. And you gave us something we desperately needed. Proof that Patricia didn't just wander off and get lost. Proof that someone did this to her. Can you tell me about Patricia? I asked softly. The police told me some things, but I'd like to know who she really was. Margaret smiled through her tears. Patricia was the kindest person I've ever known. After our parents died and her husband passed away, she decided she wanted to spend her retirement helping others. She volunteered at the senior center, she donated to charities. She was always looking for ways to make the world better. That's how she met your daughter, Jennifer added, her voice harder than her mother's. Patricia was volunteering at the Riverside Community Center, helping with financial literacy classes for seniors. Melody attended one of the sessions, claimed she was interested in learning how to help her own mother with finances. The irony was so bitter I could taste it. Patricia took her under her wing, Margaret continued. She was so happy to have found someone young who cared about elderly people's well-being. She had always wanted a daughter of her own. Melody played that role perfectly. How long did they know each other before Patricia disappeared? I asked. About 6 months, Jennifer said. At first, it was just coffee meetings and phone calls. Then Melody started helping Patricia with her banking, her bills, her investments. Patricia thought she was being smart, getting help from someone younger who understood modern financial systems better. Patricia's husband had always handled the money. After he died, she struggled with some of the more complex aspects. Melody seemed like a godsend. We didn't realize she was a wolf in sheep's clothing until it was too late. Did you try to warn Patricia? I asked. Margaret nodded miserably. I did. About 2 months before she disappeared, I noticed Patricia had withdrawn large sums of cash. When I asked about it, she got defensive, said Melody was helping her with investments. I told her I didn't trust Melody, that something felt wrong. We had a terrible argument. Patricia accused me of being jealous, of not wanting her to have other relationships. She wiped her eyes with the tissue Jennifer handed her. That was the last real conversation we had. A few weeks later, Patricia called to say she and Melody were going on a day trip to see some trails. She was so excited. And then she never came home. The room fell silent, except for Margaret's quiet crying. Mrs. Whitmore, Jennifer said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. We want to help with the case against your daughter. Whatever evidence we have, whatever testimony we can provide, it's yours. Patricia deserves justice, and so do you. Thank you, I said. That means more than you know. Deputy Morris cleared his throat. Ladies, I need to brief Mrs. Whitmore on the next steps. But I want you to know that we're building a strong case. The evidence is solid, and with multiple victims, we're looking at federal charges as well as state. After Margaret and Jennifer left, Deputy Morris sat back down across from me. What happens now? I asked. Now we execute search warrants. We've got judges signing off on warrants for your daughter's home, vehicles, business records, and bank accounts as we speak. We're also coordinating with the FBI since this crosses into serial murder territory. When will you arrest them? Soon. We're being careful to build an airtight case. The last thing we want is for them to get off on a technicality. But Mrs. Whitmore, I need to prepare you for what's coming next. I looked at him steadily. What? This is going to be a media circus. Serial killers who target elderly women, a daughter who tried to murder her own mother. The press is going to be all over this. Your face is going to be on every news channel. You need to decide how you want to handle that. I hadn't thought about that aspect. But he was right. This story had all the elements that would make national news. I want to tell the truth. I want people to know what Melody did.
Not just to me, but to Patricia, to Dorothy, to Linda Marie, to Rosemary. Those women deserve to have their stories told. Deputy Morris nodded approvingly. We'll arrange for a press conference once we make the arrests. You don't have to participate if you don't want to, but if you do, we'll make sure you're protected. I'll do it, I said. I'm not hiding from this. The next 24 hours moved in a blur of activity. The sheriff's department arranged for me to stay at a small bed and breakfast on the outskirts of town, paid for by a victim assistance fund. They posted a deputy outside my door for protection.
I spent most of that time giving additional statements, looking through photographs of evidence, and meeting with prosecutors who were building the case. They showed me financial records that tracked every dollar Melody and Vincent had stolen from their victims. They showed me surveillance footage from banks showing Melody making withdrawals from Patricia's accounts. They showed me phone records proving that Melody had been in contact with all 4 of their known victims. The evidence was overwhelming. There is no way Melody could claim innocence. The only question was whether Vincent would try to throw her under the bus to save himself, or whether they'd both go down together. On Monday morning, Deputy Morris came to the bed and breakfast with news. We're making the arrests today. Search warrants were executed at 6 a.m. We found a file cabinet in their home office full of documents related to their victims. Bank statements, forged paperwork, even personal journals where they tracked the progress of their cons. Journals? I felt sick. They kept journals about killing people? Apparently Vincent did. He documented everything, how they selected targets, how they gained trust, how much money they took, when and where they disposed of the bodies. He thought he was being smart, keeping records. Instead, he gave us a roadmap to convict them both. When will they be arrested? They're being picked up as we speak. We tracked them to a motel near the state border. They were planning to make a run for Mexico, but we got them before they could cross. My phone, which had been charging and turned off since Saturday, suddenly buzzed with a notification. Then another. Then a dozen more in rapid succession. I turned it on fully and the screen lit up with messages. Dozens of missed calls and voicemails, all from Melody. My hands shook as I opened the first voicemail. Mom, it's Sunday afternoon. I'm just checking in to see how you're feeling after our hike yesterday. You seemed tired when we dropped you off. Call me back when you get this. The lie was so smooth, so casual. She was already creating her alibi, pretending they'd taken me home safely. The second voicemail was from Sunday evening, and Melody's voice was higher, more strained. Mom, I'm getting worried. You're not answering your phone. Please call me back. I need to know you're okay. The third was from late Sunday night. Mom, this isn't funny. Where are you? Why aren't you answering? I'm going to drive over to your apartment if I don't hear from you soon. The fourth was from Monday morning, just an hour ago. Barbara, she used my first name, and her voice was cold, stripped of all pretense. I don't know what you think you're doing, but you need to call me immediately. We need to talk. She knew. Somehow she knew I'd survived and talked to the police. Deputy Morris was listening to the voicemails with me, his expression grim. She's panicking. Good. That means she knows the walls are closing in. My phone rang in my hand, making me jump. Melody's name flashed on the screen. Don't answer it, Deputy Morris said quickly. Let it go to voicemail. We watched the phone ring until it stopped. A minute later, a text message came through. I know you're alive, Barbara. I know you talked to the police. This is a huge misunderstanding. Please, let me explain. Don't ruin my life over this. I'm still your daughter. The audacity of it took my breath away. She had tried to kill me, and now she was asking me not to ruin her life? Another text came through. Everything I did was for you, to protect you. You don't understand the whole situation. Please, Mom, give me a chance to explain. She's trying to manipulate you. Classic narcissist behavior. First the fake concern, then the guilt trip, then the plea for sympathy. Don't respond. I won't, but my hands were shaking. Hearing her voice, seeing her messages, it brought back a flood of memories. The little girl who'd loved me, who'd needed me, who'd called me her hero. Where had that child gone? When had she turned into this monster? My phone rang again.
This time, it was a number I didn't recognize. "Should I answer?" I asked. Deputy Morris checked his watch. "Actually, yes. That's probably the news that they've been arrested. This might be the station calling from a different line." I answered, putting it on speaker. "Mrs. Whitmore, this is Deputy Patterson. I'm calling to inform you that Melody Christine Whitmore and Vincent James Whitmore have been taken into custody. They're being transported to the county jail now and will be arraigned this afternoon." I felt something release in my chest. Relief, maybe? Or just exhaustion. "Thank you," I said. "Thank you for moving so quickly." "Ma'am, there's something else you should know. When we arrested Melody, she was hysterical. She kept saying this was all a mistake, that she'd never hurt anyone. But when we arrested Vincent, he immediately asked for a lawyer and tried to cut a deal." "What kind of deal?" "He's claiming Melody was the mastermind behind everything, that she manipulated him into helping her. He says he has evidence that will prove she's a psychopath who's been planning these murders for years." I felt like the ground had dropped out under me. "Is that true? Or is he just trying to save himself?" "We don't know yet. But Mrs. Whitmore, you need to be prepared for the possibility that your daughter is going to paint herself as a victim in all this. She's going to claim she was abused, manipulated, or mentally ill. She's going to try to gain sympathy any way she can."
"I understand," I said, though I felt anything but understanding. After the call ended, I sat there in that bed and breakfast room, staring at my phone, at the messages from my daughter, at the proof that the child I'd raised and loved had become something I couldn't recognize. Deputy Morris stood to leave. "Get some rest, Mrs. Whitmore. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. The arraignment, the media, all of it. You'll need your strength." But I didn't rest. I sat up all night, going through old photos on my phone, pictures of Melody as a baby, as a toddler, as a young woman, trying to find the moment when things went wrong, trying to understand how someone I'd loved so completely could try to kill me so casually. I never found the answer. Maybe there wasn't one. Maybe some people are just born with something broken inside them, and no amount of love can fix it. Or maybe I'd missed the signs. Maybe there had been red flags all along that I'd ignored because I was too busy being a devoted mother to see my daughter for what she really was. Either way, the little girl in those photos was gone. And the woman who'd taken her place was a stranger I'd never known at all. A stranger who was about to face justice for her crimes. And I was going to make sure she did. The courthouse was packed on the morning of the arraignment. News vans lined the street outside, their satellite dishes pointed toward the sky like strange metal flowers. Reporters shouted questions as Deputy Morris escorted me through a side entrance, his hand firm on my elbow. "Mrs. Whitmore, how does it feel to know your daughter tried to kill you? Barbara, will you forgive Melody if she apologizes? Is it true there are multiple victims?" I kept my eyes forward, ignoring them all. Deputy Morris had coached me on this. Say nothing until the official press conference after the arraignment. Don't give them sound bites they can twist out of context. Inside, the courthouse was quieter, but no less tense. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, named Catherine Rodriguez, met me in a private waiting room. "Mrs. Whitmore, thank you for coming. I know this isn't easy." She sat across from me, her expression sympathetic but professional. "I want to prepare you for what you're about to see. Your daughter and son-in-law will be brought in for arraignment. They'll plead not guilty. They always do at this stage. The judge will set bail, though we're arguing for no bail given the flight risk and severity of charges." "Will I have to speak?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Not today. Today is just procedural, but at trial, yes, you'll be our star witness. Your testimony about the abandonment, about finding Patricia's belongings, about the pattern of financial abuse, it's the foundation of our case." "What are they being charged with?" Catherine pulled out a document and read from it. 4 counts of first-degree murder, multiple counts of elder abuse, fraud, theft, conspiracy to commit murder, and attempted murder in your case. If convicted on all counts, they're both looking at life in prison without possibility of parole. Life in prison.
My daughter would spend the rest of her life behind bars. The thought should have devastated me. Instead, I felt only a cold satisfaction. She'd tried to take my life. Now justice would take hers. There's something else you need to know, Catherine continued. Vincent's lawyer is pushing hard for a plea deal. He wants to testify against Melody in exchange for a reduced sentence. He's claiming she was the mastermind, that he was coerced and manipulated. Do you believe him? Catherine's expression hardened. Not for a second. The evidence shows they were equal partners in this. Vincent's journals prove he was fully engaged in planning and executing these murders. But his lawyer is good, and he's going to try to paint Melody as a manipulative psychopath who controlled him. And Melody's defense? Her lawyer is going with temporary insanity and abuse. They're claiming she had a mental breakdown, that Vincent was abusive and forced her into these actions. Basically, they're both trying to blame each other. Honor among thieves, I said bitterly. Exactly, which actually works in our favor. When criminals turn on each other, they usually both end up convicted. The jury will see through the lies. A bailiff knocked on the door. Ms. Rodriguez, they're ready for you. Catherine stood, smoothing her suit jacket. Stay strong, Mrs. Whitmore. Justice is coming. The courthouse was smaller than I'd expected from television shows. Wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lighting, rows of benches packed with journalists and curious onlookers. I sat in the front row behind the prosecutor's table, my hands folded in my lap to keep them from shaking. A door at the side of the courthouse opened, and two bailiffs let in the defendants. Vincent came first, dressed in an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him. He looked thinner than I remembered, his face pale and drawn. His eyes scanned the courtroom and landed on me for just a moment. I saw fear there, and something else. Resentment, maybe. As if I were the villain in this story for having the audacity to survive. Then Melody entered, and my breath caught in my throat. She looked small in her orange jumpsuit, fragile and young. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face bare of makeup. She looked exactly like she had as a teenager. Vulnerable, innocent, lost. It was a performance. I knew that intellectually. But emotionally, seeing my daughter in chains, I felt a mother's instinctive urge to protect her. Until her eyes met mine. For just a second, the mask slipped. I saw cold calculation in her gaze, a flash of pure hatred so intense it took my breath away. Then it was gone, replaced with tears and a trembling lip. "Mom," she mouthed silently, her eyes pleading.
I looked away. The judge, a stern-faced man in his 60s named Judge Harrison, called the court to order. The charges were read, a litany of horror that seemed to go on forever. 4 counts of murder, attempted murder, elder abuse, fraud, theft, conspiracy. When asked how they pleaded, both Melody and Vincent said the same thing. Not guilty, Your Honor. The words echoed in the courtroom. Not guilty. As if the evidence didn't exist. As if 4 women weren't dead. As if I hadn't been left to die in that forest. Catherine Rodriguez stood to argue against bail. Your Honor, the defendants are an extreme flight risk. They were apprehended attempting to flee to Mexico with substantial cash and false identification documents. They have demonstrated a complete disregard for human life and pose a continued danger to the community. The people request they be held without bail. Melody's lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit, argued for reasonable bail. Your Honor, my client has no prior criminal record. She's a lifelong resident of this community with deep family ties. She's not a flight risk. She was caught with a fake passport trying to cross the border, Judge Harrison interrupted dryly. I'm inclined to agree with the prosecution. Vincent's lawyer tried the same argument with similar results. Judge Harrison's gavel came down with a sharp crack. Bail is denied for both defendants. Trial date is set for 3 months from today. Defendants are remanded to county custody. Melody let out a sob, collapsing against her lawyer. Vincent's face went white, his jaw clenching with barely suppressed rage. As the bailiffs led them out, Melody turned back one more time. Mom, please," she cried out, her voice breaking. "Please don't let them do this to me. I'm your daughter. I love you." The words hit like physical blows, but I forced myself to remain still, my face impassive. The woman crying my name wasn't my daughter anymore. My daughter had died the moment she decided my life was worth less than stolen money. This was just a stranger wearing her face. The press conference was scheduled for that afternoon. Catherine Rodriguez had arranged for me to speak alongside representatives from the victims' families. Margaret Thornton Chen would be there, as would family members of Dorothy Brennan and Linda Marie Kowalski. Rosemary Chen's family had declined to participate, still too devastated by the revelation of what had happened to their loved one. I stood in front of a podium bristling with microphones, cameras pointed at me like accusatory fingers. My prepared statement trembled slightly in my hands, but my voice was steady when I began to speak. My name is Barbara Whitmore. 3 days ago, my daughter, Melody, and her husband, Vincent, left me to die in the Pine Haven wilderness. I was 70 years old, with health conditions that made survival unlikely. They abandoned me on a trail with no supplies, no phone signal, and no clear path back to civilization. They told me good luck getting home and drove away. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. I survived. I walked for hours through difficult terrain, suffering injuries and exhaustion. And during that walk, I found evidence that I wasn't their first victim. I found belongings that belonged to Patricia Thornton, a kind woman who trusted my daughter and paid for that trust with her life. I looked directly into the cameras. I'm speaking today not just for myself, but for Patricia, for Dorothy Brennan, for Linda Marie Kowalski, and for Rosemary Chen. 4 women who were targeted, manipulated, robbed, and murdered by people they trusted. 4 women who believed they were helping a young couple, only to be betrayed in the worst possible way. My voice grew stronger. Melody is my daughter. I raised her, loved her, sacrificed everything I had for her success and happiness. But the woman who abandoned me in that forest isn't the child I raised. She's a predator who targeted vulnerable elderly women for their money. She's a killer who felt no remorse about leaving me to die. I paused, letting that sink in. As a mother, this breaks my heart. But as a human being, as someone who believes in justice, I will do everything in my power to ensure that Melody and Vincent pay for their crimes. No one should ever have to fear that the people they trust will murder them for money. No elderly person should have to wonder if the younger person offering help is really planning their death. Margaret Thornton Chen spoke next, her voice thick with emotion as she described her sister Patricia. Dorothy Brennan's son spoke about his mother's kindness and generosity. Linda Marie's daughter read a statement about the devastation of losing her mother and then discovering she'd been murdered for less than $100,000. The message was clear. These weren't nameless victims. They were beloved mothers, sisters, friends, and their deaths would not be forgotten or forgiven. The trial, 3 months later, was a media sensation. Court TV broadcast every moment. Social media exploded with true crime enthusiasts analyzing every detail. The case had everything that captured public attention: a daughter who tried to kill her mother, serial murders disguised as accidents, stolen money funding a luxury lifestyle. I attended every day of the trial, sitting in the same seat in the front row. I wanted Melody to see me there, to know that I wasn't going away, that I would see this through to the end. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. They presented Vincent's journals detailing each victim and the methods used to kill them. They showed financial records proving that every luxury purchase Melody and Vincent made came from stolen money. They presented testimony from bank employees, from the victims' families, from forensic experts who analyzed the evidence I'd found in the forest. And they presented my testimony.
I spent 2 full days on the witness stand, describing the abandonment, the fear, the realization that my daughter had tried to kill me. I described finding Patricia's belongings, the horror of understanding this wasn't the first time. Melody's lawyer tried to break me on cross-examination, suggesting I was a bitter mother, angry about being cut out of my daughter's life, that I'd fabricated or exaggerated events to get revenge. But the evidence spoke for itself. The scarf, the bracelet, the driver's license, all found exactly where I said they were. The injuries documented by the paramedics, the timeline that proved I'd been abandoned and survived against impossible odds. The defense's case fell apart almost immediately. Vincent testified against Melody, claiming she'd manipulated and controlled him. But under cross-examination, Catherine Rodriguez destroyed his credibility by reading from his journals, entries where he bragged about his intelligence, where he planned the murders in meticulous detail, where he expressed no remorse whatsoever. Melody took the stand in her own defense, a risky move her lawyer had advised against. She cried, she pleaded, she claimed Vincent had abused and coerced her. She said she loved me, that abandoning me was Vincent's idea, that she'd been too afraid to stop him. But Catherine was ready for that too. Ms. Whitmore, you testified that you love your mother, is that correct? Yes, she sobbed. I love her so much. I never wanted to hurt her. Then why, in the voicemail you left on Sunday afternoon after abandoning her, did you lie and claim you dropped her safely at home? Melody's face went pale. I was confused. I was scared. Confused or covering your tracks? Catherine pulled out a transcript. Let me read your exact words. I'm just checking in to see how you're feeling after our hike yesterday. You seemed tired when we dropped you off. That's not confusion, Ms. Whitmore. That's premeditation. That's creating an alibi. I didn't mean... You didn't mean to get caught. Catherine's voice was steel. You meant to kill your mother and inherit whatever she had left, just like you killed Patricia Thornton, Dorothy Brennan, Linda Marie Kowalski, and Rosemary Chen. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. Guilty. On all counts. Both of them. When the verdict was read, Melody collapsed, screaming. Vincent sat silent, his face blank with shock. I felt nothing. No triumph, no sadness, just emptiness where my daughter used to be. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Judge Harrison showed no mercy. Melody Whitmore and Vincent Whitmore, you have been convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of attempted murder, and multiple counts of elder abuse and fraud. Your crimes are among the most heinous this court has seen. You targeted vulnerable elderly women, gained their trust, stole their money, and murdered them in cold blood. You showed no remorse, no humanity, no recognition of the lives you destroyed. He looked at them both with undisguised disgust. You are sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole on each count of murder to be served consecutively. You will spend the rest of your natural lives in prison, and you will die there. That is the justice the victims and their families deserve. The gavel came down with a finality that echoed through the courtroom. It was over. 6 months after the sentencing, I stood in front of a new apartment. Not the small 1-bedroom I'd lived in before, but a comfortable 2-bedroom in a better neighborhood. I'd used the Victim Compensation Fund and donations from supporters to start over. The victims' families had become my friends. Margaret and I met for coffee every week. Dorothy's son helped me move into my new place. Linda Marie's daughter invited me to family dinners. We'd all lost people we loved to Melody and Vincent's greed, but we'd found each other, and in that, we'd found a way to heal. I had also started volunteering at the senior center, giving talks about financial abuse and how to recognize predatory behavior. If my story could save even one person from falling victim to someone like Melody, then maybe some good could come from all this horror. Melody had written me several letters from prison. I'd thrown them away unopened.
I had nothing to say to her, and I didn't want to hear her excuses or manipulations. Some people asked if I'd ever forgive her. The answer was simple: no. Forgiveness is for people who show remorse, who recognize the harm they've caused, who genuinely want to change. Melody had shown none of those things. Even in court, even after being convicted, she'd maintained that she was the real victim, that everyone had misunderstood her. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was only sorry she'd been caught. And I refused to waste another moment of my life on someone who had valued my life so little. I was 70 years old. I'd survived an abusive childhood, widowhood, single motherhood, and my own daughter's attempt to murder me. I'd earned the right to spend whatever time I had left on my own terms, surrounded by people who actually cared about me, doing work that mattered. Melody had tried to take my life in that forest. Instead, she'd given me something unexpected: the freedom to finally stop sacrificing myself for someone who never deserved it. I was done being useful, done being convenient, done being someone's victim. I was just Barbara now, not someone's mother, not someone's target, just myself. And for the first time in 70 years, that was enough. 3 years have passed since that day in the forest. I'm 73 now, healthier than I've been in years. The physical scars from my ordeal have faded, though I still have nightmares sometimes about being lost in the trees. The emotional scars run deeper, but they're healing too.
Patricia Thornton's body was found by investigators in the Pine Haven wilderness, along with Rosemary Chen's remains. Both families finally got closure and proper burials for their loved ones. Dorothy Brennan's and Linda Marie Kowalski's families won their legal battles, recovering most of the money Melody and Vincent had stolen from their mother's estates. Melody and Vincent both filed appeals, claiming ineffective counsel and procedural errors. Both appeals were denied. They'll spend the rest of their lives in separate prisons, growing old behind bars, while their victims remain forever young in our memories. I never visit, I never write back. As far as I'm concerned, the daughter I raised died the day she left me in that forest. But I think about the families I've helped through my volunteer work, the elderly people who've learned to recognize warning signs of financial abuse, the lives I might have saved by sharing my story. That's my legacy now. Not the daughter who became a monster, but the women I've helped protect from monsters like her. And you know what? That's enough. More than enough. It's everything. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below with your thoughts. And if my story helped you or someone you know recognize the signs of elder abuse, please share it. These crimes happen more often than you think, and awareness is our best defense. Thank you for following my story until the end.